A question on the numbers. Julie, when you talk about the Hispanic vote, does that, the one that started at the very beginning, the percentages, does that include the percent that tends to vote Republican just about every election? There's like, what, 20 to 30% that does?
I've run the numbers a number of different ways. There is always going to be some grouping of not even just not progressive, but not even Democrat, people of color. We've actually run the numbers with factoring in the rate at which each racial or ethnic group votes Democratic versus Republican, and then we still see really strong. I mean, there's some slight shifts. It does come down, but I mean, for African Americans, for the most part, we're in the high 90s, right, for Democrats. With Latinos, it varies by state. So the national number comes up, is high 60s, but in some places it's well in the high 70s, and others it's much lower. So there is some work to do on the persuasion level as well that could move the needle in addition to just bringing more people in. But the biggest factor that's keeping us from winning in places where we should be is lack of participation. And one thing people talk about voter registration and GOTV, and I think kind of coming up with different terms to say that there's something actually more than that, as Maria mentioned, right? And I think, my little term I've been using lately is sort of, voter activation, right? To actually do something to get people to connect what is happening in their own lives to what happens when you do and don't vote, and when you have certain types of candidates who will enter a field because it's feasible versus not, right? And I think that's a big part of the work that needs to be done.
So I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand correctly in that first slide, when you do add up the different groups, the white progressives, that does factor in.
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying.
Yep. That
So,
does factor in
yes.
that you have some.
So I actually, when I ran it, I saw 62. I decided, but I've done it in so many different ways, but with such a big margin, that definitely counts for all Republican Latinos that, and then some, and some Republican African Americans, right? And so it is, it's going to be lower than that, but it's still well within a majority over 50%.
Right. Well, let me just take that too. So part of our analysis is where the battle takes place. And so part of our critique of conventional wisdom in politics now is the battle really needs to take place over the so-called independent swing voter. So our contention is that actually increasing the percentage participation of voters of color is a more effective route to electoral majority and a more cost-effective route. So the numbers that we laid out, so we say that people of color and progressive whites are a majority. So that's not all people of color. And so that's where you get to the actual exactly how many, and that configuration is where a lot of that battle takes place. We do think that 2008, 2010 proved the electoral viability of that. Obama winning North Carolina, New Mexico, Nevada, states that Kerry had not been able to carry, and that was that coalition that enabled him to carry those to win those. And even Ohio, right? I mean, Kerry had gotten 95% of the black vote in Ohio in 2004. He'd been elected president, just on that piece right there. And Obama had 96, 98%. So I think that's sort of looking at, we think a lot of that. And then in 2010, in this whole Republican conservative tsunami, 3 of the vulnerable Democrats who withstood that, Senator Reid in Nevada, Senator Bennett in Colorado, Senator Boxer in California, all of whom lost the white vote. And that was actually the New American Majority Coalition, which was able to enable them to be able to prevail in those elections despite that. So while not all people of color are progressive, enough are that we can win elections, and we would argue that the priority needs to be getting more of them to be progressive and more of them to participate, and that's a more cost-effective route than spending the vast sums of money that are spent chasing the independent swing voters.
And can you just address why Texas is on your list? Is it on? I mean, I know you've got the congressional stuff, but it's not a battleground state, really. I mean, is it because it has that Hispanic?
Yeah, Texas is 55% people of color.
Mm-hmm. Do you
And,
think it could be,
Oh, yes.
need something in this race? Or
well,
this
we don't
presidential
think it's gonna be competitive in the presidential race this year. But everyone keeps saying, well, Texas is a long-term proposition. But the longer you wait to start that long-term proposition, you're not actually gonna engage it, right? So we wanna start now, we think we can start now. And the other thing is that, is this thing about the concentration of the Latinos?
Yeah, it's all in like 9 counties.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Texas is big, but Latinos are in 9 counties.
Out of 254. So about 70%, almost 70% live in 10 counties alone in Texas, right? So when you break it down into those bite-sized chunks, it is doable, and there is that building that can happen now toward, long-term, statewide shifting of balance. But another thing that's really important to remember is the Texas House of Representatives the Texas State Legislature shifted from being, fairly close. I think it was about 8 seats.
4 seats, right?
Was it 4? I think it was, well, anyway. In going into the 2010 elections, and completely wiped out. In 2010, there was very little investment done, very little work done to make sure that those, sort of unimportant down ballot tickets or races over there got funded and were won. What was the result? When that happens, going into 2010, when redistricting for congressional districts is about to happen, that is disastrous at the national level, right? So part of what I think gets missed about Texas is that you have to be doing work on a multiple levels, and that's going to have local impacts, which are really important for the people who actually live there, and it's going to have national importance as well.
Right, and I really want to, I know we're in DC, so we're obsessed with the presidential. But in fact, most people, it's the local elections, it's their state representative. It all has to build from those local races. And I think that particularly as well is building the bench of progressive candidates for the long term. It pains me deeply that the first Hispanic governors on the mainland are Republican. We have to change that.
I just have one last thing about the strategic nature of a place like Texas. Like I keep saying, once you crack Texas, then I can retire. Is that what's interesting about these areas where there's demographic changes taking place is that they're taking place in places that are the anchor locations of the right wing, the conservative politics in this country. And so you had an example in California, in Orange County. Ronald Reagan launched his, one of the biggest rallies in Orange County, California in 1984. Because of Latino growth in Orange County, Loretta Sanchez was not able just to get elected as a Democrat Latina, but able to displace B1 Bob Dornan, who was one of the most conservative Republicans that there was. And so not only do we have a chance to flip and move places like Texas and like Georgia, but to really take out the underpinnings of the conservative political position in this country. I think that's how we're going to flip the political balance of power in the country. So maybe 1 or 2 questions, then we can wrap up with people. Go ahead.
You mentioned $20 million as a target annually. Do you think you could, I think that's what you said. Is that a goal for 2012?
Well, that was a goal. Right?
What do you reasonably expect
so we think that, let me just emphasize that piece as well in terms of the model that we're looking at, right? That there are 12.4 million households of people of color and progressive whites making over $100,000 a year. And so as Maria mentioned, Obama's, which is the largest donor base of any ever for president, had 600,000 donors over $200 or more. So just in terms of the potential of that universe, we think is vast. So if we were to get 0.8% of that 12.4 million, that'd be 100,000 people. Our model is $20 a month, $240 a year, called the one latte a week approach. And so that if we were able to get, we get to 100,000 people, $20 a month, that's $24 million a year. So that's what we see as the universe. So we hope to be able to get as close, obviously close to that. We suspect it will take some time to get to that. We are hopeful and optimistic about being able to move $8 to $10 million in this cycle if possible. But we certainly see this as a long-term proposition, and that we're looking at this as a multi-year effort that we feel we're privileged to be able to be at a moment in time when this major level of transition is taking place, and we can be part of helping to bring it about. So I think we're towards the end of time. If there aren't any other questions, I did just want to thank the folks who did the heroic work to put this together, Adele de los Reyes, the PowerPlex Deputy Director, and Amy Castanal and Kirk Clay for all the work that they did helping us put this together. And thank everybody for your time. We'll be around afterwards if people want to have additional questions. And see you out there. Thank you.